This isn't just a story about betrayal, it's a cold, calculated masterclass in professional retribution. It's about the silent, surgical dismantling of a life built on a lie, a life purchased with stolen grief. When it was all over, when the dust settled, she looked into the mirror and saw not a winner, but a pauper standing in the rubble of her own greed. She thought she'd secured her future by robbing me of my past, by weaponizing our mother's passing. But what she failed to realize is that some injustices aren't simply mourned and moved on from. Some injustices demand a response, an equal and opposite reaction. And that response? It cost her everything. And I mean everything. Welcome back to Pro Revenge Narratives, the only place dedicated to the deep dive into calculated retribution, where we dissect the moments people stop praying for karma and start becoming it. Today, we're plunging into the icy depths of familial betrayal, a story so raw, so utterly shocking, that it redefined the boundaries of sibling rivalry. If you love seeing justice served cold, calculated, and completely devastating, then do us a favor right now. Hit that subscribe button and ring that notification bell, because you won't want to miss a second of this incredible takedown. Our story begins, as so many tragedies do, with a loss. It centers on three key players: our protagonist, Eleanor, a woman whose gentle nature masked a mind of steel; her mother, Martha, a kind, hard-working soul who was the anchor of their small, fragmented family; and finally, the villain of the piece, Eleanor's own sister, Veronica. Veronica was the quintessential golden child, though that luster was often more a reflection of her own aggressive self-promotion than any inherent quality. She was a master manipulator, always finding the path of least resistance, which usually involved exploiting the generosity and unconditional love of their mother. Eleanor, meanwhile, was the quieter, more dependable daughter. She was the one who, over the last 5 years of Martha's life, stepped away from her own budding career to become the primary caregiver. She managed the medications, coordinated the appointments, and provided the relentless, exhausting, 24/7 emotional and physical labor of caring for a parent with a debilitating chronic illness. Where was Veronica during all this? She was busy. Too busy for palliative care, too busy for hospital visits, too busy, in fact, to return phone calls. Her life, her high-powered marketing job in a different state, her expensive vacations, her carefully curated social media presence, was simply too important to be sullied by the unpleasant realities of sickness and sacrifice. Eleanor never complained. She did what had to be done out of pure love for her mother. She just assumed that her sister, despite her absence, would recognize the weight of this sacrifice when the time came. Martha passed away peacefully in the home Eleanor had lovingly maintained for her. In the quiet, hollow aftermath of the funeral, the topic of the inheritance finally came up. It wasn't a fortune, but it was significant: a beautiful, paid-off house in a desirable neighborhood, and a portfolio of investments worth just under $1 million. Martha, ever the fair and balanced mother, had always intended for the estate to be split 50/50 between her two daughters. She had even told Eleanor this multiple times. But when Eleanor finally sat down with the family attorney, Mr. Harrison, the air thickened with a premonition of dread. Mr. Harrison looked uncomfortable. He cleared his throat and presented the last official will, signed just 3 months prior to Martha's death. The document was clear, unequivocal, and absolutely devastating. It left 90% of the entire estate to Veronica, citing her supposed greater financial need, and an alleged clause stipulating that Eleanor had already been sufficiently compensated through her room and board while acting as a caregiver. Eleanor's portion was a paltry 10%, barely enough to cover the funeral costs she had fronted. The betrayal was a physical blow. Not just the theft of the money, but the theft of her mother's memory. Martha would never have done this. Never. Eleanor knew, deep in her soul, that this document was a lie. She looked closer at the signature. It was shaky, erratic, and critically, it was dated from a period when Martha was heavily medicated, barely lucid, and certainly not in a state to sign over a multi-million-dollar estate. The immediate realization hit Eleanor like a tsunami. Veronica had orchestrated a complete power grab. During one of her rare, fleeting visits, she must have manipulated their severely ill mother, perhaps even forged the signature, or had her sign it under duress, all while Eleanor was out running essential errands. The greater financial need was laughable. Veronica lived a life of deliberate luxury, financed by reckless credit. Eleanor was the financially prudent one. The compensation was a cruel twist of the knife: framing Eleanor's selfless act of love as a transactional arrangement. Eleanor confronted Veronica. She drove across state lines, walked into her sister's lavish, rented condo, and laid the will on the pristine marble countertop. Veronica didn't flinch. She leaned back on her expensive sectional, a lazy, triumphant smirk playing on her lips. She didn't deny it, she all but gloated. "It's the last will, signed, sealed, delivered. You had a place to stay for 5 years, that's more than fair. Honestly, you needed the structure, darling. I, on the other hand, have a lifestyle to maintain." That moment, that casual, utterly callous dismissal, was the turning point. The pain of the loss was suddenly eclipsed by a burning, incandescent rage. Eleanor had spent 5 years focused on life and death. Now, her focus narrowed down to a singular objective: retribution. She didn't want the money back just for herself. She wanted to tear down the empire of lies Veronica was attempting to build upon their mother's grave. She consulted with Mr. Harrison, the attorney. He was sympathetic but honest. Contesting a will is a long, ugly, and expensive battle, often ending in a settlement that leaves both parties broke and bitter. He advised her to walk away and take the 10%. But walking away was no longer an option. Eleanor looked at the meager 10% and saw not a settlement, but a war chest. She took the money. She sold the few stocks she had saved. She liquidated her entire savings, putting a lien on her own future. She was officially broke, but she had funded the opening move of her campaign. This was no longer about a legal fight, this was about a psychological siege. Eleanor wasn't interested in the messy, public spectacle of a probate hearing. She was going to play a much cleaner, much colder game. She decided she was going to become the invisible force of gravity that slowly, inexorably, pulled Veronica's meticulously constructed world apart. A game of chess, played with real people and real consequences. The seeds of retribution were planted, and they were the seeds of financial ruin and social isolation. Eleanor knew her sister's fatal flaws: narcissism, arrogance, and a staggering lack of financial discipline. Veronica had inherited nearly $2 million, but she had the spending habits of someone who expected to inherit 10. She was already shopping for a massive, ostentatious house, an absurdly expensive new car, and had booked several grief therapy cruises. Eleanor smiled. This wasn't going to be a difficult target to strike. The planning phase took 6 months of monastic focus. Eleanor's background was in advanced data analysis. She wasn't an investigator, but she was a master at finding patterns in noise. She started by focusing on the house. The inherited house was the largest single asset. Veronica, impatient and eager to monetize her windfall, had immediately listed it with a local realtor at an inflated price. Eleanor's first strategic move was utterly simple and devastatingly effective: the whisper campaign of disrepair. She called the realtor anonymously, citing minor but serious-sounding issues with the house. "Did you know about the foundation cracks in the basement? I heard the roof needs replacing. Mother couldn't afford it." She repeated these calls, switching her voice, adding new, plausible, expensive-to-fix problems: faulty wiring, plumbing issues, potential mold in the attic. Nothing was true, but the sheer volume of tips spooked the realtor, who subtly started advising his clients to tread cautiously. The house sat, unmoving, a millstone around Veronica's neck. Next, Eleanor focused on the liquidity. Veronica, living large, needed cash flow. She was constantly trying to pull money out of the investment portfolio. Eleanor used the one advantage the 10% share gave her: a tiny bit of leverage. She contacted the estate's financial advisor and, using the pretext of her own desire to liquidate her small share, started asking complex, aggressive questions about the structure of the inherited investments. She repeatedly requested stress tests and liquidity analyses, all perfectly within her rights as a shareholder. The constant, unnecessary scrutiny created bureaucratic friction. It made the advisor's job a nightmare, and every time Veronica requested a large withdrawal, the process was intentionally delayed by days, then weeks, due to compliance issues that Eleanor's relentless queries had introduced. Veronica was constantly waiting on her own money, missing out on opportunities, and having to push back her extravagant purchases. The financial advisor, tired of the endless hassle, started treating Veronica as a nuisance, dragging his feet on all her requests. The real brilliance, The stroke of genius that elevated this from simple revenge to pro-revenge was the corporate connection. Eleanor knew Veronica's biggest weakness was her career. Veronica wasn't as high-powered as she claimed. Her success was built on taking credit for others' work and maintaining an impressive but thin facade. Eleanor knew the name of Veronica's primary competitor in her industry, a mid-sized, aggressively growing firm. Using the small capital she had, Eleanor registered a shell LLC under a completely innocuous name, something like Phoenix Digital Strategies. She then spent weeks meticulously documenting Veronica's actual professional track record, the projects she sabotaged, the times she missed targets, the instances where she fired talented people to eliminate a perceived threat. These were all facts, easily verifiable if someone knew where to look. The final piece of the planning puzzle was the social element. Veronica was a social climber who needed a continuous stream of wealthy, powerful friends to feel relevant. Eleanor, through her careful monitoring of her sister's social media, knew exactly who these people were and, more importantly, why they mattered to Veronica. The execution was a masterpiece of precise timing and devastating coordination. The first domino fell with the new house purchase. Veronica, absolutely convinced of her new millionaire status, had put an offer on a sprawling $500,000 house, a massive financial stretch, even with her inheritance. She'd put down a huge non-refundable deposit. The deal hinged on the quick sale of their mother's house. This is where the Whisper campaign paid off. When the potential buyer finally came forward for Martha's house, their inspection report cited the exact, non-existent, issues Eleanor had anonymously planted, a possible foundation issue, and evidence of dated wiring that will not pass current code. The buyer immediately dropped their offer by $100,000. Veronica refused to budge, convinced she was being lowballed. The buyer walked. Veronica was now stuck with the house, facing a six-figure tax liability on the assets she'd liquidated and an enormous mortgage payment looming on the new house she was contractually obligated to close on. She went ballistic, screaming at the realtor. But the damage was done. Eleanor had successfully locked up the largest single source of capital, turning the inherited asset into an immediate liability. Then came the professional strike. This was Eleanor's favorite part. Using her Phoenix Digital Strategies LLC, she sent an impeccably professional, highly targeted email, not to Veronica's bosses, but to the CEO and the hiring manager of her direct, key industry competitor. The email was simple, non-accusatory, and chillingly effective. It stated, in part, "We have conducted a deep competitive analysis and have identified a significant vulnerability in your primary competitor's strategic marketing team, led by Veronica, last name. Our analysis suggests her team is built on unstable ground, and a swift, targeted talent acquisition could yield immediate market share gains. We have data points on key personnel turnover, missed opportunities, and internal conflicts. We recommend you explore aggressively poaching the most competent members of her team now." The competitor's CEO saw this email and immediately recognized the opportunity. Within 2 weeks, 3 of Veronica's most vital, high-performing employees were poached. Veronica was left reeling, her department crippled, and her year-end project thrown into chaos. Her boss, already suspicious because of the disruption, suddenly started looking closely at Veronica's actual performance metrics, which were far less impressive than the stories she told. The seed of doubt, planted by an untraceable, third-party entity, had taken root. The final hammer blow was the social ruin. Veronica's social circle, her sponsors, the ones who gave her leads and invited her to exclusive events, were all wealthy and intensely protective of their reputations. Eleanor knew that Veronica, in her endless pursuit of the next luxury item, was deeply in debt, leveraging her new inheritance aggressively. Eleanor hired a completely separate, low-profile, private investigator, one who specialized in public records and financial reports. For a surprisingly small fee, the investigator compiled a detailed report of all the liens, the high-interest personal loans, the maxed-out credit cards, and the aggressive debt collection calls Veronica was now fielding thanks to the cash flow crisis. The report was completely factual and publicly verifiable. Eleanor then anonymized the report again and, using an untraceable, encrypted email, sent it to the wives and husbands of Veronica's closest, most influential friends, with a simple, anonymous subject line, **for your information, the true financial state of a frequent borrower **. The reaction was instantaneous. These weren't friends, they were fair-weather allies. As soon as the report hit their inboxes, Veronica became a liability, a walking, talking financial risk. The invitations dried up overnight. She was systematically excised from the wealthy social circles she had worked so desperately to infiltrate. The calls went unanswered. She was, professionally and socially, marooned. The climax of the revenge narrative, the sweet, agonizing payoff, arrived 6 months after the initial will was read. Veronica was now completely over-leveraged. The inherited house still sat on the market, driving her deeper into debt. Her job was on a knife edge. She had exhausted her meager remaining cash, trying to keep up appearances. The final takedown was a masterful confluence of all the earlier maneuvers. Because the financial advisor had been intentionally frustrated by Eleanor's constant inquiries, he was now hypervigilant. When Veronica, in a panic, requested a massive, immediate withdrawal from the remaining portfolio to cover her ballooning debts, the advisor, seeing the panicked request as a major red flag, stalled for time. During that delay, Eleanor, acting on an anonymous tip she had planted through an old paralegal contact, filed a very small, very specific public records request against Veronica. The request was for documentation concerning the period the will was signed. This public request, though small, triggered an automated flag at the state's Elder Abuse Division, a flag Eleanor had engineered to go off with the keywords new will, drugged state, and caregiver absence. Within days, the bank froze Veronica's accounts pending a mandatory internal investigation into possible elder financial abuse, a measure taken solely to protect themselves from liability. This wasn't a criminal charge, but a financial chokehold. The frozen accounts meant Veronica missed the closing deadline for her new $500,000 house. She lost the substantial non-refundable deposit. Worse, she was forced to default on several high-interest loans she had taken out against the expected quick sale of the inherited house. The inherited house, the one she had stolen, was now sold by the bank in a distress sale for far less than its market value to cover the defaulted loans. The investment portfolio, once worth nearly $1 million, was liquidated, eaten up by legal fees, tax penalties, and outstanding debts. The permanent consequences for Veronica were breathtakingly complete. She didn't go to jail, but she was left with something far more painful for a narcissist: total and utter financial and social ruin. She was fired from her high-powered job, not for theft, but for incompetence and creating a toxic work environment, which the CEO was only too happy to confirm after her crippling performance failures. She had to declare personal bankruptcy, losing every luxury item she'd purchased. Her wealthy friends didn't just ignore her, they actively disparaged her. Veronica, the self-proclaimed golden child who had inherited nearly $2 million, was left with nothing but a mountain of regret and crippling debt. She ended up having to move in with a distant, unloving aunt, constantly having to explain how a millionaire went broke in less than a year. As for Eleanor, the protagonist, the mastermind of this flawless retribution, she watched the show unfold from a comfortable distance. She didn't gloat, she didn't send a final, taunting message. The quiet satisfaction of seeing justice administered so thoroughly was enough. The money she spent on the revenge campaign? She considered it the most worthwhile investment of her life. A fee paid to the universe for correcting a grave cosmic imbalance. Eleanor didn't just move on, she moved forward. She used the experience to pivot her data analysis skills into a new, thriving career as a financial forensics consultant, helping others who had been victims of intricate financial fraud. Her emotional recovery wasn't immediate, but it was profound. She wasn't weighed down by bitterness, because she had achieved completion. She had honored her mother's memory not by fighting for the money, but by ensuring the wicked did not profit from their crimes. The inheritance was lost to both of them, but Eleanor got something infinitely more valuable: peace and the unwavering knowledge that she was the one who was right, and that she had the courage and the intellect to prove it. This story, friends, is a powerful reminder that justice isn't always a courtroom drama. Sometimes, it's a long-form, highly strategic game of patience, planning, and perfect execution. Karma isn't a passive force, it's a mirror that reflects the consequences of your actions, often shattered by the hands of a determined victim. Veronica tried to buy her future with a lie, but Eleanor proved that an ill-gotten gain is a house built on sand. What is the most satisfying revenge story you've ever heard? Let me know in the comments below. And don't forget to like and subscribe for more pro-revenge narratives. Until next time, stay safe, stay smart, and remember, the best revenge is always served cold.